The atmosphere on the flight seemed to freeze. Every gaze was directed at row 16, where a tense conversation was taking place. Darius Bennett gripped his phone tightly, his voice calm but decisive. Next to him, Nia, his sister, clutched his arm so tightly that it left a mark on his skin. In front of them stood Flight Attendant Deborah Collins. Though she maintained a professional smile, it was clear she was trying to keep calm. The cabin was completely silent. Children stopped fidgeting. Adults ceased their conversations. Even the sound of the engines outside seemed to grow more distant. Yes, we're still waiting for takeoff. Flight 257. To Charlotte, Darius spoke into the phone. His voice wasn't loud, but it was clear enough for those nearby to hear every word. I want to report the discriminatory behavior of one of your flight attendants. My sister and I were asked to give up our seats for a late passenger. I believe the reason was our skin color. Deborah's face flushed. Sir, that's not at all what happened. Darius raised a finger, not taking his eyes off her. The flight will depart in 20 minutes. I want to speak with the captain. No one on the flight that morning could have anticipated how a simple seat reassignment request would lead to a series of complex events. Hidden prejudices, misunderstandings, and then an unexpected bond forming between strangers. 3 hours earlier, Darius had woken up to the familiar scent of coffee and an unfamiliar feeling, nervousness. After 15 years working at an architecture firm in Detroit, he had finally become a shareholder. The celebration in Charlotte with family had been postponed several times due to the pandemic, and then his mother had to undergo knee surgery. But today, finally, he and Nia were about to return, bringing the good news their parents had been waiting for all their lives. Nia leaned against the living room doorframe, holding a cup of coffee. You're humming, she teased. Really? Darius zipped up his suitcase, I guess. I'm excited. It's been a while since we've been home. At 34, Nia was 5 years younger than him, but always the more grounded one. She took after their father in her sharp eyes and high cheekbones, and had their mother's demeanor, calm and decisive. Nia held a Ph.D. in sociology and became a tenured professor at Great Lakes University before turning 30. But she had never made him feel inferior for taking a slower path, and it has nothing to do with finally being able to tell Dad about the company that will soon be Bennett Lewis. And Bennett, huh? She chuckled softly. Darius laughed. Yeah, I guess there's a little bit of that. He'll be so proud, you know. He glanced at the clock. The car's almost here. You ready? Nia nodded, then paused. Actually, I have something I want to tell you before we go. She took a deep breath. I've been invited to be a tenured professor at Carolina State University. They want me to head up the new Racial Justice Research Center there. Darius froze his hand, still on the luggage. Charlotte. Are you going to move there? Not sure yet. I've built a lot at Great Lakes. But this past year made me think, maybe success means nothing if you can't share it with family. Darius stepped forward and hugged his sister. That's amazing, Nia. No matter what you decide. I'm proud of you. Look at us. Nia smiled softly in his arms. The Bennett kids have grown up and are living their dreams. The drive to Metro Wayne Airport passed quickly. They talked about their parents' reactions when they heard the news. Their father had been a postal worker for nearly 40 years, and their mother a school teacher. They had dedicated their lives to making sure their children could live the lives they never had. Remember that awful brown station wagon Dad used to pick us up? And Nia laughed. Bringing it up, I was so embarrassed I wanted to crawl under the ground every time my friends saw it. She admitted, but it paid for your SAT prep course, Darius reminded her, and my architecture summer camp. Nia nodded, her gaze drifting out the window as the city of Detroit faded behind them. But what I remember most is the book Dad always kept in the passenger seat. While waiting for us to finish school, he always took the chance to read. Darius smiled. Dad used to say once you have knowledge, no one can take it away from you. They entered the terminal, caught up in the familiar hustle of the airport, announcements blaring, passengers rushing, the smell of expensive coffee and fast food hanging in the air. They breezed through security. Nia, as always, took the lead, handling everything efficiently. Darius still following his sister, just like throughout their childhood. As usual, Darius followed Nia, just like when they were kids. When they reached the boarding gate, he suggested, "Let me go get something for breakfast." Nia nodded. "Just like always." "Oh, and if they have lemon muffins with sugar, get one for me." When Darius returned with the food, he saw Nia chatting enthusiastically with an elderly man with gray hair, wrinkled skin, but sharp eyes. She listened, nodded, asked questions. The perfect social researcher. Nia introduced him when she saw him approach. "This is my brother, Darius." "Darius, this is Mr. Walter. Has flying to Charlotte to meet his first granddaughter." "Congratulations, sir." Darius shook his hand. "Is it a girl or a boy?" "A girl." Walter grinned broadly. "Amelia Rose. Born just yesterday." Walter turned to Darius. "Nia told me you're an architect." "My son-in-law is a bricklayer. Specializes in masonry. He often complains that architects these days don't know anything about materials." Darius laughed. "I can't argue with that. These days I work more with 3D models than with actual bricks. Times change." Walter nodded, but his gaze lingered with hesitation. "Sometimes I wonder, does technology really help us progress? Or does it just make us forget the things that once mattered?" The conversation continued comfortably until the airport staff began calling for boarding. Walter was in the first group. Before he left, he winked, pretending to tip an imaginary hat, and said, "Hope to see you in Charlotte." He'll be the old man lost in the baby section. While waiting in line to board the plane, Nia nudged him gently. "See, not all old white men are outdated." "He told me he once marched with Dr. King." Darius raised an eyebrow. "You managed to get his entire biography in just one conversation. People always have stories to tell as long as you're willing to listen." Nia replied. She checked their tickets. "Our seats are in row 16 seats C and D." They boarded the plane without any trouble. Nia sat by the window and Darius in the middle. The aisle seat next to them was still vacant. Darius stowed their luggage and sat down, picking up the in-flight magazine. "I've never been able to sleep when I fly," he said, flipping through a page. "Maybe today I'll finish the book you gave me for Christmas last year." Nia was about to respond when both of them were drawn to the murmuring ahead. A middle-aged woman with shiny blonde hair was arguing with a flight attendant. Even from a distance, they could sense the irritation in her gestures and the tilt of her head. Late passenger, Nia guessed. "She doesn't seem happy." Darius continued, turning the pages. "It's their business, not ours." But it quickly became their business. The flight attendant, a woman in her 50s with her blonde hair tied neatly, approached the woman. Her name tag read, Deborah. Though she was smiling, the smile was clearly strained. "Sorry," she began. "We're having a little issue. Mrs. Prescott, this passenger here, was assigned the wrong seat. She was supposed to be sitting with her husband. Could one of you move to seat 28B, Deborah added. "It's also an aisle seat just at the back of the plane." Darius glanced at Deborah. The well-dressed man, her husband presumably, was sitting comfortably in first class, showing no sign of concern. Her husband sitting in first class. Darius asked Deborah, gave a slight nod, her smile stiffening. "Yes, but there are no more seats available there. She got stuck at security and couldn't make it on time to keep the upgraded seat." Nia sat up straight. "I'm sorry, but my brother and I booked these two seats to sit together. We need to discuss some family matters during the flight. 28B is also an aisle seat." Deborah said, her tone sounding more insistent. "We'd really appreciate your help." "Why us?" Darius asked, his voice low but clear. "There are other passengers traveling alone who might be more willing to move." Deborah's eyes flickered with uncertainty. "You're the first people I've asked. So if we don't agree, will you ask someone else?" Before Darius could finish, Mrs. Prescott interrupted. "I've paid enough for this ticket," she said loudly. "It's not my fault. The airline made a mistake. I shouldn't be shoved to the back of the plane just because these people won't cooperate." The atmosphere froze. The words "these people" echoed heavily, with clear implications. Darius felt his chest tighten, a feeling he had experienced countless times before. Subtle, hard-to-pinpoint prejudices, yet extremely familiar. Nia repeated softly, her voice not loud, but distinct. "These people. Who do you mean?" Mrs. Prescott flushed. "I just meant the passengers who booked together." "That's what I meant." Nia didn't take her eyes off her. "That's crystal clear," Deborah interjected. "Perhaps we should look for another solution. Mrs. Prescott, please follow me." "No, Mrs." Prescott cut her off. "I've been a Platinum member for 15 years, Mrs. Prescott said, emphasizing each word. "I will not sit at the back of the plane when there are clearly empty seats. Right here." "Have him move," Mom Deborah started, but Darius raised his hand to stop her. "It's fine," he said, already reaching for his small bag. "He'll move." "No, you don't need to do that," Nia whispered firmly. "It's not worth it." Darius, tall and steady, stood up slowly. He looked directly at Deborah. "But before I change seats, I'd like to speak with the captain." Deborah paused for a moment. "The captain is currently busy with pre-flight checks. How can I assist you?" "No, I want to speak directly." Darius's voice was firm, yet calm. "About the seating policy and the potential for discrimination." The word discrimination hung in the air like magic, freezing the atmosphere. Deborah stiffened. Mrs. Prescott's face darkened. "There's no discrimination here," Deborah quickly responded. "We're just trying to accommodate all passengers." "Then I assume you won't mind if I confirm that with the captain." Darius pulled out his phone. "Or I could call the hotline directly. I think I have the right to file a complaint, especially when this request seems to be targeting us personally." Deborah's professional mask slipped for a moment. "Sir, there's no need to escalate this. If you don't want to move, well, find another solution." Actually, a voice called out from behind. Everyone turned around. It was Walter, the elderly man from the waiting gate. He was standing in the aisle with a warm smile. "I'm in 28B," he said. "I'm happy to move up here. These two should sit together, especially since they're attending a family event." Deborah breathed a sigh of relief. "That's wonderful. Thank you for your flexibility, sir." Mrs. Prescott was not pleased. She glanced from Walter to the empty seat next to Darius, then pursed her lips. "That's kind," she said, "but I need an aisle seat. I have a condition that requires frequent bathroom breaks." Walter squinted, still maintaining his relaxed demeanor. "I prefer sitting by the window. I like watching the clouds, so I'll take the middle seat. You still have access to the aisle. Everyone gets what they want, right? With no other option." Mrs. Prescott reluctantly nodded, her face stiff. She grudgingly sat in the seat next to Darius. Walter picked up his bag, walked over slowly, and sat between the two siblings. "It's a pleasure to continue our conversation." He turned to Nia. "You were telling me about your research topic." Deborah stepped away to assist other passengers. Darius and Nia exchanged a glance over Walter's shoulder. Without speaking, they understood each other. A silent understanding, shared by those who had long been familiar with these small yet painful clashes. This time, it might have cut deeper than usual, perhaps because they were heading home carrying pride and expectations. only to be knocked down by the harsh reality that no matter how successful they became, their skin color would still be the first thing others saw. Mrs. Prescott focused intently on her phone, avoiding eye contact. Passengers continued boarding and the noise began to rise again, but at seat 16, the tension still lingered in the air. As the flight attendants began their final checks before takeoff, Nia leaned slightly toward Mrs. Prescott. "I wish you a pleasant flight," she said in the calm tone she typically used in lectures. "If you need to get up during the flight, just let us know." Mrs. Prescott looked up a little surprised by the kindness. "Thank you," she said after a brief hesitation. "I appreciate that." Just as things seemed to settle down as the plane began to pull away from the gate, Deborah returned to row 16, this time accompanied by a younger flight attendant, a black woman, her name tag reading Tasha Sari. Deborah began addressing Darius and Nia. "There seems to still be an issue with the seating arrangements. We need one of you to move." Darius looked at her incredulously. "We've already resolved this. Mr. Walter has switched seats." "Yes, but we were just informed that Mrs. Prescott needs to sit with her companion for medical reasons." Deborah motioned toward the man approaching, none other than Mr. Prescott from first class. He agreed to move from first class to sit with his wife. But now we need to make room for both of them here. Everyone recognized the absurdity. Walter frowned. "I just switched seats." "Now you want to make them move again?" Tasha, the younger attendant, looked at Deborah with confusion, but said nothing. "This is ridiculous," Nia said bluntly. "First you wanted to separate us so she could have an aisle seat. Now that it's been resolved properly, you're making up another reason to force us to move. What's the real issue here?" Deborah's face tightened. "There's nothing going on. We're just trying to accommodate a medical request. This information was just updated." Darius raised an eyebrow. "Funny, though? Mr. Prescott didn't seem to care about his wife earlier. He only agreed to give up his first-class seat now, and now he's willing to leave first class." Darius asked, his voice tinged with surprise. "While all this time he hasn't cared about his wife's situation." Mr. Prescott cleared his throat. "I wasn't informed of this until the captain reported it." The captain, Darius, raised an eyebrow. "So he was involved in the seating arrangements, but couldn't meet with me when I requested." A tense silence spread through the cabin. Passengers began turning their heads toward row 16. Curious, annoyed, and a few sympathetic looks were exchanged. Deborah lowered her voice but maintained her firmness. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask one of you to move. If you continue not to cooperate, we'll have to involve security." The threat was unspoken, but clear. Darius felt the heat rising in his throat, the anger he had learned to suppress since childhood, the kind of anger society warned him as a black man not to show. He glanced at Tasha, hoping to find some empathy, but the young flight attendant avoided his gaze. Her body tensed between two opposing forces, her profession and her conscience. It was Walter who broke the deadlock. "Excuse me?" He stood up, even though the plane was preparing to taxi. "I want to speak with the captain." Deborah's face paled. "Sir, you need to sit down. The plane is moving. The captain is busy. Then I suggest we stop the plane." Walter said calmly but decisively. "Because what I'm witnessing here shows signs of discrimination, and as a former civil rights lawyer, that deeply concerns me." His words echoed like thunder through the cabin. Deborah lost her color. Tasha's eyes widened. The Prescott couple exchanged glances as if realizing the situation was beyond their control. "Sir, that a very serious accusation," Deborah said, trying to regain her composure. "And I am fully aware of that," Walter nodded. "I'm prepared to escalate this if necessary." Now either we return to our original seats and take off, or we meet the captain as Mr. Darius requested earlier." At that moment, Darius' phone vibrated lightly. A message from Neo Walter marched with Dr. King and was a civil rights lawyer. Didn't expect this twist. Even in the midst of the tension, Darius couldn't help but smile. His sister always knew how to find a bit of humor, even in the most awkward situations. No one spoke for a few minutes. The atmosphere was taut, like a drawn string. Finally, Deborah reluctantly nodded. "Ill report to the captain," she said through gritted teeth, and turned to hurry back toward the cockpit. Tasha stood there, still looking confused, twisting her uniform scarf. I apologize for the inconvenience," she said quietly. "Would anyone like some water while we wait?" "Sounds good," Walter chuckled lightly. "Thank you, and if possible, I'd also like to know more about the airline's seating policies." For learning purposes, Tasha left, leaving a whispering atmosphere behind in the cabin. Mr. Prescott cleared his throat again. "Maybe I should go back to my original seat while we sort this out. Then you should go ahead." Nia replied, her voice cold but not raised. Mrs. Prescott sat next to the siblings, the air around them still as death. Walter, seemingly unaffected by any discomfort, pulled out his phone and continued showing pictures of his newborn granddaughter to anyone who would look. Time dragged on. Nearly half an hour passed and the plane still hadn't left the runway. Passengers started murmuring, checking their watches, frowning at the delay signs. Then the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Dear passengers, this is Captain Samuel Whitaker. We're delayed a bit due to some administrative issues. We'll be taking off shortly. Crew, please meet for a brief session in the back." Deborah turned back, signaling for Tasha to follow her. The two of them quickly walked toward the back of the plane, avoiding any further looks toward row 16. The meeting was brief but tense. Deborah gestured animatedly, while Tasha nodded slightly, her gaze full of concern. When they returned, it was Tasha who approached. "Row 16. Mr. Darius, Ms. Nia, the captain would like to invite you to the front to discuss. And Mr. Walter, if you're willing." Walter stood immediately. "I'm more than happy to. I always enjoy talking to decision-makers." The three of them followed Tasha to the front of the plane. Darius could feel the eyes of every passenger on them. Some curious, some irritated by the delay, and a few silently nodding, as if they had been through something similar before. They arrived at a small area just outside the cockpit. A tall, broad-shouldered man stood waiting. His name tag read, "Captain Samuel Whitaker, Mr. and Ms. Bennett, Mr. Green." He shook each of their hands. "I understand there has been some trouble with the seating arrangements. I'd like to hear directly from you." Darius nodded, appreciating his straightforwardness. "It's not just a trouble, Captain. There are signs of discrimination. My sister and I were singled out first, despite there being other options. When we were denied, a new excuse was made to force us to move. Captain Whitaker didn't react immediately. I understand, Mr. Green. Are you a witness? I was the one who suggested the seat change to resolve the initial situation." Walter nodded, but then that solution was rejected, and immediately a new reason was brought up. Clearly inconsistent with the usual procedures. It seems that this request was aimed directly at us and completely contrary to the usual procedures. Walter said, his voice calm but firm. Captain Whitaker nodded slightly. "Bennett, do you have anything to add?" Nia, the true scholar, spoke calmly and precisely with each word. This situation is a textbook example of subtle bias. The initial request seemed harmless, but in reality it was aimed at us. When questioned, the reasons suddenly changed, and whenever a solution was proposed, a new issue would immediately arise. She paused for a moment. Throughout the entire process, there was always the underlying implication that if we didn't cooperate, things would escalate. Captain Whitaker nodded and turned to Tasha, still standing nearby. Flight Attendant Brooks, where do you fit into this situation? What did you observe? Tasha hesitated, her eyes drifting toward Deborah, who was standing at the back of the cabin. I came in after the initial incident, but I saw that the Bennett siblings were asked to move, despite another passenger volunteering to switch seats. And did you find that unusual? He continued. Yes, Captain. Tasha answered bluntly. That didn't follow the seat dispute resolution process we were trained in. Captain Whitaker rubbed his chin, his voice now clear and decisive. I need to make this clear. The safety and dignity of every passenger is my responsibility. If any discrimination is taking place on this flight, I need to address it immediately. He looked back at Darius and Nia. On behalf of the airline, I apologize to both of you. This situation was not handled correctly. I will file an official report. Darius nodded. So what options do we have now? There are a few options, the captain replied. We can proceed with the flight with both of you sitting in your original seats. We can also rearrange things for the Prescott couple. Or if either of you feels uncomfortable continuing the flight with this crew, we will arrange alternative transportation and provide full compensation. Nia spoke softly. I think we'd like to stick to the plan. Our family is waiting for us in Charlotte. But I do expect a commitment that this won't happen again during the flight. You have my word. Captain Whitaker responded firmly. I will work directly with the crew on this issue. He turned to Walter. Mr. Green, would you be willing to return to your original seat? We deeply appreciate your timely intervention. Walter smiled. Of course, Captain. Though I really enjoyed sitting with the Bennett siblings in row 16. He turned to Nia and winked. I hope you'll continue telling me about your research while we serve drinks. Before leaving, Captain Whitaker gently placed his hand on Darius' shoulder. I know you asked to speak with me earlier and were denied. That is concerning as well. I want you to know that, if it's a legitimate issue, the door, or in this case my cabin curtain, is always open. Darius nodded. Thank you for that. The three of them returned to the cabin. Deborah had now returned to row 16 and was discussing the final decision with the Prescott couple. Mr. Prescott would return to first class while Mrs. Prescott, Elaine, would remain in the aisle seat with Darius in the middle and Nia by the window. Walter returned to 28B. As soon as they were settled, the captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. We will be taking off shortly. He paused for a moment, then continued. I also want to emphasize this airline has a zero-tolerance policy for any form of discrimination. Every passenger on this flight deserves to be treated with respect and dignity. If you experience or witness anything contrary to that, please do not hesitate to notify a flight attendant or request to speak directly with me. The cabin buzzed with chatter after the announcement. A few people nodded in agreement. Darius saw Tasha pass by, and she gave a small silent nod of gratitude. Elaine Prescott, now sitting next to them, stared straight ahead, her face cold and maintaining distance. After a while, she turned to Darius. I just want to make it clear that I had no intention of discriminating against anyone. I just wanted to sit next to my husband. I completely understand wanting to sit near family. Darius replied calmly. My sister and I feel the same way. Elaine remained silent for a moment, then nodded slightly, her gaze softening somewhat. Well, it seems like we'll be sharing this row for the duration of the flight. Yes, Darius replied. I promise not to take up the armrest if you do the same. A brief smile flickered across her lips. Deal. As the plane began to speed down the runway, Nia leaned slightly toward Elaine. I noticed your wedding ring earlier. It's beautiful, a classic Art Deco style, right? Elaine seemed slightly surprised by the thoughtful comment. Yes, it was my grandmother's. How did you know I did my dissertation on material culture and identity formation? Jewelry often tells us more than books do, especially in terms of racial and economic stratification. Elaine was genuinely surprised. That sounds very interesting. Yes, Elaine admitted hesitantly. That does sound interesting. People are often more alike than different, Nia said, especially when you look at the things they've kept through generations. Her gentle but profound comment left Elaine silent. She sat still as the plane gradually ascended into the sky. The air in the cabin settled as the plane reached cruising altitude. Darius took out the book Nia had given him for Christmas, The Warmth of Other Suns, by Isabel Wilkerson. As he flipped open the cover, he caught a brief glance from Elaine. She recognized the title and quickly looked away. "Have you ever read this book?" Darius asked, genuinely curious and hoping to reconnect with her. Elaine hesitated. "My book club picked it last year. I didn't finish it. It was longer than I thought." "It's tough," Darius nodded, "but very worth it. It helped me understand my grandparents' journey, from Mississippi to Detroit in the 40s. Elaine's face softened slightly, a rare warmth appearing. "My family's been in Boston for generations. Sometimes I forget that the Great Migration was only a few decades ago. My grandparents didn't talk much," Darius continued. "They just said the North had more opportunities. It wasn't until later that I understood what they had left behind." "My husband's family is from Georgia," Elaine said. Now speaking more freely, Richard's grandfather ran a small pharmacy in Charlotte, one of the few white-owned businesses that served the black community during segregation. Her voice carried pride. He believed healthcare shouldn't be divided, even if everything else was. At that time, that was progressive, Nia acknowledged. Even though it was still within an inherently unjust system, Elaine pursed her lips. He did the best he could. In an imperfect world, Darius interjected, seeing that Nia was getting close to an academic boundary that could jeopardize the fragile understanding they had built. "We're in Charlotte for a family reason, too. My parents' 50th wedding anniversary." 50 years, Elaine said quietly, her gaze softening. "That's an accomplishment. Richard and I have only been married for 32. Darius smiled. "Do you have any advice for someone who hasn't yet married?" Elaine tilted her head in thought, then replied, "Pick someone who makes you laugh, especially when you're angry. And if you can have separate bathrooms?" Nia burst out laughing, the first genuine and unexpected laugh since the flight began. Honestly, that's excellent advice. As the flight attendants began serving drinks, Tasha personally returned to row 16. Her demeanor was now much more friendly and considerate. "What would you like to drink? You'll have a tomato juice? No ice," Elaine said, then added softly, "Thank you." Tasha nodded and continued serving. Elaine turned to Darius. "The flight attendant earlier. Deborah Shez. Not a bad person. We've flown together a few times. She's always been very kind." "Maybe with you," Nia said quietly, not harshly, but clearly enough. Elaine blushed. "I mean, I don't think she intended to discriminate. Most discriminatory behaviors are not intentional." Nia replied, her tone taking on a familiar teaching quality. They come from unconscious biases, from systemic patterns and assumptions that haven't been re-examined. Do you think she sat there and said, "I'm going to target these 2 black passengers"? No, Nia answered, but when she needed to resolve the issue, her mind automatically chose us as the easiest people to bother. "That interpretation seems rather uncharitable," Elaine responded, her voice growing sharper. "But it's backed by data," Nia said succinctly. "My research focuses precisely on interactions like this. Statistics show that minorities are often asked to accommodate more than white passengers." Elaine paused. "I'm sure your research is thorough, but not everyone is a subject to be analyzed." "Actually, everyone is," Nia replied. "Society operates based on the behavior of each individual. Every person is a data point in someone else's experience." Darius felt the tension rise again. He quickly intervened to redirect the conversation. Speaking of data, he smiled lightly. Nia's been invited to be a professor at Carolina State. She might even move to Charlotte. The shift in topic was successful. Elaine immediately showed genuine interest. The campus is beautiful there, especially in the spring. My granddaughter is studying law there. She graduated just last year. The flight continued, and something strange began to form in row 16. It wasn't friendship, but recognition. They didn't agree, but they began to understand each other as individuals with their own stories. Elaine, whose real name was now known to be Elena, shared stories about her grandchildren and her work at the hospital. Darius talked about the architecture firm, while Nia made an effort to present her research in more accessible terms. Mid-flight as promised, Walter moved from seat 28B back into the cabin to continue his conversation with Nia. Walter stopped beside row 16, his face beaming as he saw the tension from earlier had finally eased. "Excuse me for a moment," he said with a gentle smile. "I just got sent some pictures of my granddaughter. I'd like to share them with Miss Bennett here." "Please go ahead," Elena replied softly, shifting slightly to make room. "Though I'm not sure you'll be very comfortable standing in this aisle." "Just a minute," Walter said, pulling out his phone. "Look, this little one was born yesterday and already looks just like her grandmother." The three of them looked at the pictures, smiles fleeting across each of their faces. Then Walter spoke softly, almost as if sharing a thought with himself. "You know, today has reminded me of something important." "What's that?" Darius asked. "That progress isn't always a straight line. Sometimes you move 2 steps forward, then 1 step back. But what matters is that you keep moving forward." Walter's eyes gleamed with nostalgia. "Back when I was a young lawyer in the 60s, no one cared about changing seats for black passengers. The fact that the captain cared about this today, that's progress." "Small progress," Nia said half in contemplation. "All progress starts with small steps," Walter replied. He lifted the photo again. "Just like this little angel. My granddaughter was born into a world still full of injustice, but it's certainly better than the world I grew up in. And I believe by the time she's my age, the world will be even better." Elena gazed attentively at the photos. Then she gently asked, "What's the baby's name?" "Sophia Rose." Walter answered, his eyes lighting up. "It's the name of my late wife." Elena nodded gently. "A beautiful tribute." Walter put his phone away. "I should head back to my seat. But before I do," he lowered his voice as if revealing a secret, "Miss Bennett, I think today's discussion is certainly worth being included in your Center for Racial Justice's program." Nia was taken aback. "How did you know about that?" "I never mentioned it specifically," Walter winked. "Years of being a lawyer taught me how to listen. You've mentioned your research topic, and the new initiative at Carolina State has been mentioned in academic journals. Simple deduction. You certainly keep surprising people." "Mr. Green." Darius laughed. "At my age, that's the best compliment I can get." Walter gave a light bow. "I wish you all a peaceful remainder of the flight." He turned to Elena. "I hope you find this row as useful as I think your 2 companions have." His words were delivered so gently that no one could take offense. Walter leisurely returned to seat 28B. Elena sat still for a moment. Then she murmured, "He is truly special." "Yes." Darius nodded, and a testament that allies can come from anywhere. "Do you think he's an ally?" Elena asked, hesitating. "Today, definitely. He spoke up when staying silent would have been much easier." "That's an ally." Elena remained silent, then asked, "I've never thought about whether I need allies or not. I just live my life." "That's privilege," Nia replied straightforward. "Living without having to worry about how power structures or biases affect you. Or others." Elena stiffened slightly. But instead of responding sharply, she asked, "Do you teach your students to start by making such accusations?" Nia paused. "I don't intend to accuse anyone." "It's just an observation," Elena responded. "But it sounds like an accusation. If your goal is to help others understand, rather than push them away, perhaps you should reconsider how you frame things." An awkward silence filled the space. Darius looked at his sister, seeing her genuinely contemplating the situation. Nia, who was always sharp in workshops and lectures, didn't always find it easy to navigate emotions in real life. "You're right," Nia admitted, "in academia. Precision often takes precedence over tact, but in real life, we need both." Elena gave a slight nod, seemingly satisfied with the acknowledgement. "Honestly, I understand what you're saying about privilege. I'm not entirely unfamiliar with the concept. My daughter works in social work in Chicago. She's been educating me regularly." Chicago Darius perked up. "Where does she work?" "East End Youth Services," Elena replied. "They focus on supporting youth with psychological trauma." Nia and Darius exchanged surprised glances. "My partner volunteers there." Nia said David Carter. "He coaches basketball for the kids on weekends." Elena's eyes widened. "David tall, bald, always wearing flashy sneakers. That's him," Nia laughed. "He believes the right shoes are the weapon to connect with youth. My daughter talks about him all the time. The kids really adore him." Elena shook her head, exhaling in surprise. "The world is so small, smaller than we think." Darius smiled. For the first time that day, his smile was free of any weight. The rest of the flight passed in a fragile tranquility. They hadn't resolved all the deep injustices or changed peoples. Hearts in an instant. But they had done something deeper. They saw each other. Truly saw each other as complex individuals full of flaws, but worth listening to. As the plane began its descent, Captain Whitaker's familiar voice rang out from the cockpit. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are now preparing to land at Charlotte Douglas International Airport. The weather today is wonderful, 24 with clear skies. On behalf of the entire crew, I'd like to thank you for flying with us." Captain Samuel Whitaker paused for a moment before continuing. "Personally, I want to thank you for your patience with this delayed flight. I've always believed that sometimes the journey is just as important as the destination. And today, I believe meaningful conversations took place on this flight. Conversations that remind us that no matter our different backgrounds, we are all fellow travelers, deserving of respect and understanding." Elena glanced briefly at Darius and Nia. Her gaze carried an unspoken question. "We didn't say anything more to him after the meeting." Darius spoke up as if reading her mind. "It seems he just made his own conclusions." As the plane descended, Elena hesitated, then spoke. "I want to apologize, not just for the seating, but for my attitude too." She exhaled lightly. "This morning, Richard and I had quite an argument. I brought that anger onto the plane." "We all have bad days," Darius responded gently. "Yes, but not everyone turns their bad day into a burden for others or inadvertently perpetuates harmful patterns." Elena said this time with a tone of self-awareness and a hint of Nia's academic style. "Sincere yet honest self-reflection is the only thing we can do." Nia replied, her voice softer now. "Learn from it and try to do better next time." The plane gently touched down on the runway. Passengers began retrieving their carry-on luggage, checking their phones, ready to disembark. Elena's phone rang immediately. She glanced at it and said, "Richard is waiting at baggage claim." She turned to Darius. "Will your parents be picking you up?" "Yes," Darius said, grabbing his bag from under the seat. "They should be at the arrivals hall by now." Elena nodded slightly, her tone warmer now. "Hope your family has a wonderful celebration. 50 years, that's truly impressive." "Thank you," Nia smiled. I hope your visit with your family is peaceful and meaningful, too." As they exited the plane, Deborah Collins was standing at the door to bid passengers farewell. When she saw Darius and Nia, her smile briefly faltered, but she still nodded politely. "Thank you for flying with us." "Thank you for the service," Darius replied in a neutral tone. Tasha stood nearby and caught his gaze. She gave him a thumbs up, a silent but sincere gesture. Darius nodded slightly and smiled in return. At the top of the jet bridge, Walter was already waiting, leaning on a cane they hadn't seen before. "I thought we'd wait to go with my friends from row 16. He said as if it were the most natural thing. "We're honored," Darius said, offering his hand to help him along. As they turned toward the passenger area, Walter asked, "So what will you tell your parents about the flight today?" Darius and Nia exchanged a look, then replied together, "Everything," and the three of them burst into laughter. "My parents taught us to always tell the truth," Nia explained. "Especially when the truth makes you uncomfortable," Darius added. "My dad always says the things that are easy don't change anything of value." Walter nodded in approval. "Your father sounds like a wise man. I hope I get to meet him someday." "Well, you should come to the anniversary party," Nia suggested immediately. "Saturday night at the Westside Cultural Center. There's dinner and dancing, too." Walter looked briefly flustered, but moved by the gesture. "Such a kind invitation. But I wouldn't want to intrude on a family reunion. After today, I think you've already become part of the family." Darius laughed. "My parents would definitely love to meet the person who helped their child stand firm." Walter smiled, genuinely touched. "When you say it like that, I'd be honored to attend. Sophia will be the center of attention, so my daughter probably wouldn't mind giving me up for the evening." As they approached security, Darius spotted his parents right away. His father tall with salt and pepper hair. His mother was small, but her eyes sparkled, standing out in a brightly patterned dress. They were holding a handwritten sign that read, "Welcome home." Our pride Darius' throat tightened, just like it always did when he returned home. A wave of gratitude washed over him. For the people who had sacrificed their whole lives so their children could hold their heads high in a world that was sometimes unjust. "There they are," he pointed to Nia. She was waving enthusiastically, her face lit up. Walter looked on. "Ah, now I understand where you get your demeanor from, Darius. And that smile. Definitely from your mother." "Nia." The whole family rushed to greet them. Hugs, introductions, and then warm looks as they briefly explained who Walter was. Phone numbers were exchanged for a weekend meetup. "I have so much to tell you," Nia said, linking arms with her mother, "about the flight. But there's also one important piece of news." "What's it?" their father asked, curiosity gleaming in his eyes. "Good news. I hope wonderful news." Dad Darius smiled. "News that makes all the sacrifices you've made truly meaningful." Together they walked out of the airport, the Bennett family with their new friend Walter Green. In Darius' heart, each step felt like a reminder of the long journey of an entire generation. The flight that seemed so simple had become something much greater, a microcosm of the social journey that America is still undergoing. Over the course of a few hours, there had been conflict and misunderstanding, biases and defensiveness, but there had also been learning, connection, and ultimately a form of progress. Tentative, but real. It wasn't perfection. The systems that allowed discrimination to happen still existed largely unchanged. Deborah Collins might continue her work, perhaps becoming more aware of her own biases, but it's not certain she'll change at her core. Ilona Prescott would return to her life in Boston, carrying with her a few new reflections to ponder. As for Darius and Nia Bennett, they would continue on their journey, one that was never easy, where skin color was often seen before character. But at this moment, in the bustling Charlotte airport, walking beside family, both blood-related and newly connected, Darius felt something akin to hope. Not the naive hope that everything would change in a single day, but a persistent hope, born from witnessing small steps being taken in the right direction, from understanding that the journey toward justice would be long and bumpy, but every conversation, every clash, every connection was a step forward. Stepping outside into the sunshine, Walter Green turned to the siblings. "I've been thinking all day about what I should bring as a gift for your parents' anniversary. Would it be too forward if I asked to say a few words at the party?" "Not at all," Nia smiled brightly. "My parents will be honored." "Well, that's good." Walter's eyes sparkled with joy. "Because at my age, there's no better gift than a story. And today I have a wonderful story about two children they can be proud of." Darius laughed. "But don't make us out to be heroes. We were just trying to keep our seats." Walter slowed down his voice, rich like the echo of history he had once been a part of. "Sometimes holding on to your seat can be the most revolutionary act." As they made their way toward the parking lot, Darius' parents walked ahead with their daughter Walter, placed his hand on Darius' shoulder, speaking quietly. "Your sister's center for racial justice. It will create real change, won't it?" Darius nodded. "If anyone can turn academic research into real-world action, it's Nia." Walter looked at him thoughtfully. "And your architecture work, does it bring about change?" Darius hesitated. He had never thought of his work in that light. Architecture, for him, was passion. It was a career. But now with that question, he realized something he had never put into words. "I'm designing a community center in South Chicago," he said slowly. "It'll have affordable housing, a daycare and space for small businesses in the area. It won't change the world." He hesitated. "But it will change a neighborhood." Walter finished for him. "And a neighborhood makes a city makes a country." Never underestimate the power of creating space for people to grow. When they reached the car, Darius' father opened the door, his eyes full of pride as he watched his children walk toward him. And in that moment, Darius understood deeply what his parents had known for a long time: that progress is measured by grand acts or noisy transformations. It's measured in small actions, personal choices standing firm, whether silently or publicly, in moments that may seem insignificant. Flight 2187 had been delayed. The plane had once stood still on the runway, but the journey, the real journey toward understanding and justice, was still going on even as the wheels left the ground. And it would continue. One conversation, one shifted glance, one unexpected connection, bit by bit. Life sometimes pushes us into situations where our first reaction might be silence, humility, or simply stepping aside to avoid trouble. But as Darius and Nia did, just by holding on to their seats, sometimes those small actions become profoundly meaningful in a world still rife with injustice. That flight didn't just take them home. It brought all of us closer to something bigger: understanding. Amid conflicts, one can choose to defend themselves, but there are also those who choose to listen, learn, and connect, like Elena, like Walter, and like the silent passengers who witnessed and reflected. Today's story reminds us that progress is not in grand declarations, but in each sincere conversation. In every time we find the courage to speak, not to win, but to understand each other more. This is how society changes, slowly but surely, step by step. If something in this story has touched your heart, a warm feeling, a new reflection, or simply a hope that the world can be better, don't let that emotion pass quietly. Please like to support human-centered content like this. Share this video to spread the spirit of empathy and justice, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the real heartfelt stories about humanity, courage, and healing journeys. Thank you for taking the time to listen, journey alongside, and feel. See you in the next stories, where every person, every small moment can create great change.